This is a deep dive video about Qin Shi Huang. Let's skip the basic introductions and go straight to these questions. How harsh were the harsh punishments? What's inside the Mausoleum? What was the purpose of the Terracotta Army? How these unification policies still profoundly influence China today? I'm Tom, a TV program director who makes shows about Chinese culture and history. I have visited the Terracotta Army Museum 4 times, and I even got to step into the actual excavation pit for filming. If you choose to click on this video, I believe that you have the basic knowledge about Qin Shi Huang. So chapters are in the description. Feel free to jump around the parts you are most interested in. Jump right into the first topic, harsh punishments. Let's start with a Qin Dynasty law quiz. Question 1. The correct answer is A. Amputation of the right foot. But that's not all. Their faces would also be tattooed with insulting words, and they would be forced into slavery. Question 2. The correct answer is A. 30 days of forced labor. B is from ancient Athens, and the Draco's laws, even stealing small things could get you executed. Compared to this law, Qin's law is not that harsh. Question 3. The correct answer is B. 10 lashes. Why so strict? Because oxen were critical for farming in the Qin era. Protecting agricultural productivity was a top priority. In fact, there was also a law that said, if you had 10 female oxen and 6 of them didn't give birth to calves, you would be fined 1 shield as a penalty. There were also some other common punishments. Shave off your beard and sideburns. Chinese believe that body, hair, and skin are seen as something inherited from parents, so damaging them was considered very disrespectful. Another famous one was collective punishment. If one person committed a death penalty, the whole family would be killed. The old, the young, children, servants, everyone. Completely wipe out the family and make sure no surviving children will grow up and take revenge. Were these punishments harsh? Sure, but that's only if you compare them to today's standards. If you compare them to the laws in Europe at the same time, they were not unusually brutal, not really a tyranny by the standards of that era. Also, we need to consider historical context. Before the Qin dynasty unified China, there was a long period called the Warring States. There were many different states constantly at war, each trying to conquer the others. And because it was an era of war, the laws in all these states were extremely harsh. The goal was to scare people and maintain control, to kill 1 to warn 100. So when Qin finally unified China, they basically carried over this wartime legal system. The Qin dynasty only lasted 15 years, and much of that time was spent trying to stabilize the new empire. There simply wasn't any time for a deep legal reform, to shift from a wartime legal mindset to a peacetime one. So if you judge Qin law through a modern lens, of course they look brutal, but compared to earlier Chinese dynasties, Qin law was actually less harsh. And here is something important. Qin laws were also progressive in some ways. Here are some examples. These bamboo documents recording an early form of ID. There was a man named Wu Sao from Handan. The record says he had yellowish skin and an oval face and was about 1.7 meters tall. Of course, there was no photography back then, but with this written record, it was much harder for anyone to impersonate him. So this little bamboo slip was basically his proof of identity. Qin law wasn't just about harsh punishments. It also covered many areas that sound surprisingly modern. How to punish domestic violence. How to punish people who ignore someone dying within 100 steps. There were even consumer protection laws. There were also environmental laws. People were not allowed to catch birds, hunt wild animals, and cut down trees in February. These activities were only allowed again until July. On top of that, Qin law paid great attention to process and evidence. Take a burglary, for example. Whether the lock was being picked, whether the crime was completed, or whether they were caught in the act. Standardizing wasn't just based on a single person's word anymore. Evidence is also important, like the patterns, density, and width of footprints. There were clear guidelines on determining the cause of death and how to conduct proper examinations. In other words, Qin law was not just about punishment, it introduced a whole new level of legal thinking and procedural fairness that was far ahead of its time. Now the second topic is probably what you are most curious about, the mysterious mausoleum. You know, Chinese emperors had this interesting tradition. As soon as they became emperor, they started building their mausoleum. Because in Chinese culture, the tomb is the home after death, so it had to be planned carefully and built beautifully. Qin Shi Huang became emperor at just 13 years old. He gathered 700,000 workers and started building his mausoleum. The construction went on for 39 years. The whole mausoleum covers 56 square kilometers. That is as big as 78 forbidden cities or 8,000 football fields. If you count the surrounding mountains, it's over 100 square kilometers. The ancient historian Sima Qian wrote that the underground palace was filled with treasures. It has well oil lamps that burned forever to light the mausoleum. And the mausoleum had a model of the universe, stars above and rivers and oceans below. And those rivers were made of real liquid mercury. And guess what? Modern science actually found high levels of mercury underground here. So some of that old story is probably true. But why build it like this? Well, like I said, it's meant to be the emperor's home after death. Whatever he had while alive, palaces, army, government, gardens, music, performances, he wanted the same in his mausoleum. The layout of the mausoleum proves this idea. The famous Terracotta Army is actually very far from the main brutal chamber, about 2 kilometers away. Why so far? Because the emperor's home should be peaceful, no fighting inside. So the soldiers stay on the outside, guarding the mausoleum. And this underground army wasn't just for show, it was a real military setup. Generals, soldiers, cavalry, drivers, with real sharp bronze weapons, almost 8,000 soldiers in total. Moving closer inside, you will find the emperor's entertainment zone, an underground zoo with 46 bronze dancing waterfall, cranes, swans, and wild ducks, an underground theater troupe. Some statues are so detailed that you can see their muscle lines. There were cars for him to patrol his empire, and even government officials, so the emperor could keep running the empire after death. Now about those terracotta soldiers. Here's something cool. Each of them looks like a real person. No two are the same. That's because they were not made from one mold. They were handmade, and you can even find the fingerprints left behind. After that, they were painted with colors made from natural minerals, which made them more durable. And every statue had an ID, a name carved in. This was a Qin dynasty rule. Whoever made something had to put their name on it, so people could be held responsible for quality. But all this is just the tip of the iceberg. What is really inside the emperor's ritual chamber? We still don't know. No one has ever opened it. Why? Because once you open it, the damage is permanent. The terracotta soldiers were brightly painted, but once they were unearthed, the paint faded in minutes. Science still cannot fully stop that from happening. That's why today's archaeology is all about protective exploration. We use radar and remote sensing to see underground, but we don't rush to open the mausoleum. And that's the beauty of history. It's dynamic. It's always being discovered, updated. Even a single piece of pottery or new tube could change how we see China's past and even human civilization itself. Now the third hot topic, the uniform system. Unifying the 6 kingdoms was just Qin Shi Huang's first step. What really mattered was building a uniform system. Just like what you read in textbooks, weights, measures, and currency, and standardize the length of the axles for cars and the written form of the Chinese language. Why did he need to do this? When Qin first unified China, the 6 kingdoms were like 6 parallel universes. Back then, taxes were paid in grain, but without standardized containers, one place might hand in a pound while another gave a whole sack. This created loopholes for corruption and endless complaints from the people. And it was impossible to evaluate an official's performance. There was no way to tell if someone was doing their job properly. Even paying salaries was a mess, because at first, officials were paid in grain. There were many types of currency, so you need to constantly exchange money. Even though people spoke a similar language, their writing was to some extent different. Cars had different axle lengths, so when a cart crossed into another region, it may get stuck on the road. So on paper, the country was unified, but in reality, it couldn't really operate as one. That's why Qin Shi Huang decided to create a standardized system. First, he unified the written language. Today, China has dozens of dialects. I'm from Beijing, and when I go to Hong Kong, I can barely understand what people are saying. But that doesn't stop us from communicating. When I travel to Korea or Japan, I don't understand the spoken language either, but when I see the writing, I can guess some of the meaning. That's because much of East Asia was influenced by Chinese characters, thanks to Qin Shi Huang. So, before Qin Shi Huang unified China, did people from the Six Kingdoms not understand each other? Not exactly, but it was definitely harder. All Chinese writing came from the same roots, oracle points and bronze inscriptions. But over time, the character changed in different ways. And also, most ordinary people were not educated, and they didn't know how to write, and spoke with heavy local accent. Local government officials didn't need to study other written language. Only diplomats were trained like today's diplomats. They could understand a different language. So people across the kingdoms can communicate, but to a limited extent. After unification, that became a problem. In one city, you might have people from all 6 former kingdoms. Officials, workers, merchants. It was a mess. If people couldn't read the same policy, how could they follow it? Spoken language was hard to change, but writing could be standardized. So, Qin created 2 written systems, one for officials, one for normal people. Because of that unification, a huge empire could be managed as one. That same writing system has been passed down for thousands of years. Today, we can still read the words from the oracle points, so we can know what happened to our ancestors. It's one big reason Chinese civilization has never been interrupted, and why China is the only ancient civilization that still exists today. And then he unified the weights and measures. Length, volume, weight, all had to follow the same standard. He had official measuring tools made with standardized inscriptions, and sent them to every region. Now, market had one set of rules, and taxes were collected using a single standard. By unifying weights and measures, Qin Shi Huang finally understood what the whole country really had. He knew how much farmland there was, how much grain people could grow each year, and how much that grain could support. Everything became clear, so this was actually a great financial reform. And then came currency. Before this, after years of separate kingdoms, coins came in all different shapes, size, and weights. Some were made officially, others privately, and even counterfeit ones were common. People really wanted one easy, reliable currency. Finally, they got it. Round coins with a square hole in the middle. The square hole made it easy to string coins together. And even if a coin was slightly heavier or lighter, it had to be used as its face value. Local currencies were banned. As a result, trade efficiency skyrocketed. Next, the same check rule. Back then, cars had wooden wheels. If they followed old ruts in the road, the ride was smooth. But if the car's axle was too wide or too narrow, the wheels would bump in and out or even get stuck. This made travel hard and could break the cart. So, long trips between states were nearly impossible. After unified China, Qin Shi Huang made a rule. All cars must have the same axle width, 6 chi, and all new roads were built to match this size. From that point on, armies and traders could travel easily across the country. One standard size made the whole empire move faster and smoother. There were also standardization in weapons production. At the time, arrows and crossbows were the most needed weapons, so they had to make sure that any arrow could fit any crossbow, and that the force, air resistance, range, and accuracy were all consistent. Otherwise, training soldiers would be useless. Like, one arrow shoots 9 meters, another only 3 meters. How could they fight? In fact, weapon standardization was a big reason why Qin was able to unify China. There are lots of evidence to prove this. At the Terracotta Army site, they found over 40,000 arrowheads, all made to the same technical standards, with almost no variation. In world history, true standardized production is often said to have started with the modern European Industrial Revolution. But the idea of industrial thinking, it already began in Qin China 2,000 years ago. And many of these standardized systems were adopted by the later Han Dynasty and gradually evolved into the system used in China today. Okay, this is a long video. Hopefully you know more about Qin Shi Huang. And please give me a favor, like, comment, and subscribe. And tell me what do you want to know about China. My covering plain topics are about Chinese social media, ancient Chinese music, and ancient Chinese maps. Tell me which one you are interested in.